Number 13, from Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, by M.R. James. Among the towns of Jutland, Viborg justly holds a high place. It is the seat of a bishopric. It has a handsome, but almost entirely new cathedral, a charming garden, a lake of great beauty, and many storks. Near it is Hold, accounted one of the prettiest things in Denmark, and hard by is Finnerup, where Musk Stig murdered King Eric Klipping on St. Celia's Day in the year 1286. 56 blows of square-headed iron maces were traced on Eric's skull when his tomb was opened in the 17th century. But I am not writing a guidebook. There are good hotels in Viborg. Presler's and the Phoenix are all that can be desired. But my cousin, whose experiences I have to tell you now, went to the Golden Lion the first time that he visited Viborg. He has not been there since, and the following pages will perhaps explain the reason of his abstention. The Golden Lion is one of the very few houses in the town that were not destroyed in the Great Fire of 1726, which practically demolished the cathedral, the Sonjakirke, the parish council, and the Radhus, the town hall, and so much else that was old and interesting. It is a great red brick house. That is, the front of it is brick, with Corby steps on the gables, and a text over the door. But the courtyard, into which the omnibus drives, is of black and white wood and plaster. The sun was declining in the heavens when my cousin walked up to the door, and the light smote full upon the opposing facade of the house. He was delighted with the old-fashioned aspect of the place, and promised himself a thoroughly satisfactory and amusing stay in an inn so typical of old Jutland. It was not business in the ordinary sense of the word that had brought Mr. Anderson to Viborg. He was engaged upon some researches into the church history of Denmark, and it had come to his knowledge that in the National Archives of Viborg there were papers, saved from the fire, relating to the last days of Roman Catholicism in the country. He proposed, therefore, to spend a considerable time, perhaps as much as a fortnight or 3 weeks, in examining and copying these, and he hoped that the Golden Lion would be able to give him a room of sufficient size to serve alike as a bedroom and a study. Eventually, number 12 was selected. Like its neighbours, it had 3 windows, all on one side of the room. It was fairly high and unusually long. There was, of course, no fireplace, but the stove was handsome and rather old, a cast iron erection, on the side of which was a representation of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and the inscription, First Book of Moses, chapter 22, above. Nothing else in the room was remarkable. The only interesting picture was an old coloured print of the town, date about 1820. As is usual in Denmark, the names of the lodgers were displayed on a large blackboard, divided into columns and lines, the numbers of the rooms being painted in at the beginning of each line. The one and only point which suggested any food for thought was the absence of any number 13 from the tale of the rooms. He could not help wondering whether the objection to that particular number, common as it is, was so widespread and so strong as to make it difficult to let a room so ticketed. Toward 11 o'clock he resolved to go to bed, but he remembered that the particular book which he had been reading in the train was in the pocket of his great coat, then hanging on a peg outside the dining room. To run down and secure it was the work of a moment. When he arrived back at his door and turned the handle, the door entirely refused to open, and he caught the sound of a hasty movement towards it from within. He had tried the wrong door, of course. He glanced at the number. It was 13. His room would be on the left, and so it was. And not before he had been in bed for some minutes did it occur to him that whereas on the blackboard of the hotel there had been no number 13, there was undoubtedly a room numbered 13 in the hotel. Rooms usually look larger in a dim light than in a full one, but this seemed to have contracted in length and grown proportionately higher. Well, well. Sleep was more important than these vague ruminations, and to sleep he went. On the day after his arrival, Anderson attacked the National Archives of Viborg. The documents laid before him were far more numerous and interesting than he had at all anticipated. There was much talk of a house owned by the bishop, but not inhabited by him, in the town. Its tenant was apparently somewhat of a scandal and a stumbling block to the reforming party. He practised secret and wicked arts and had sold his soul to the enemy. It was of a piece with the gross corruption and superstition of the Babylonish church that such a viper and blood-sucking wizard should be patronised and harboured by the bishop. That evening, passing along the corridor, Anderson again noticed the door of number 13. He heard footsteps and a voice within. During the few seconds in which he halted to make sure of the number, the footsteps ceased, seemingly very near the door, and he was a little startled at hearing a quick hissing breathing as of a person in strong excitement. He went to his own room. Here was a very curious thing. The portmanteau was not to be seen. It had been moved by officious servants. Doubtless the contents had been put in the wardrobe. No, none of them were there. He dismissed the idea of theft. Still, this was vexatious. He went to the right-hand window and looked out on the quiet street. The light was behind him, and he could see his own shadow clearly cast on the wall opposite. Also the shadow of the bearded man in number 11, and also the shadow of the occupant of number 13 on the right. Number 13 was leaning on his elbows on the windowsill, looking out into the street. There was a distinct playing up and down of a dull red light on the opposite wall. Suddenly he swept aside from the window and his red light went out. Next morning, the portmanteau stood exactly where he had first seen it. Strangely unobservant he must have been last night. He had been smoking at the right-hand window before bed, and yet the cigarette end lay on the sill of the middle window. He started to go down to breakfast. Number 13 was later. Here were his boots still outside his door. Just then he caught sight of the number on the door. It was 14. The next number to 14 was number 12, his own room. There was no number 13 at all. After some minutes devoted to a careful consideration of everything he had had to eat and drink during the last 24 hours, Anderson decided to give the question up. If his eyes or brain were giving way, he would have plenty of opportunities for ascertaining that fact. If not, then he was evidently being treated to a very interesting experience. That night, the singing began. It was a high, thin voice. It seemed dry, as if from long disuse. It went sailing up to a surprising height, and was carried down with a despairing moan, as of a winter wind in a hollow chimney. It was a really horrible sound. The three men went into the passage. "It is number 13, you see," said Anderson. The lawyer turned. In that moment the door opened, and an arm came out and clawed at his shoulder. It was clad in ragged, yellowish linen, and the bare skin, where it could be seen, had long grey hair upon it. The door shut again. A low laugh was heard. The crowbar was raised. There was no cracking or rending of wood, only a dull sound, as if the solid wall had been struck. The door was gone. The plaster wall of the passage stared them in the face. Number 13 had passed out of existence. An early cockerel in the yard beneath was heard to crow. The eastern sky was paling to the dawn. What they did find between the beams of the flooring was a small copper box. In it was a neatly folded vellum document, with about 20 lines of writing. After 2 days' contemplation of it, Jensen hazarded the conjecture that the language was either Latin or Old Danish. Anderson ventured upon no surmises. That same afternoon, he told me what you have read, but he refused to draw any inferences from it, and to assent to any that I drew for him. Thank you for listening, and join us next week for another story.